In 1968, 6,000 U.S. Marines were cut off and surrounded at a remote combat base called Khe Sanh. They faced a North Vietnamese force of roughly 20,000. The story we all know. American courage against impossible odds. But what if that's not the whole story? Some historians, and even the Marines themselves, have argued those 6,000 men weren't just defending a base. They were bait in a brutal high-stakes gamble to save a failing war. For 77 grueling days, these Marines endured one of the most intense sieges of modern warfare. The official version celebrates a heroic defense and stunning tactical victory. But look past the White House press briefings, and a darker picture emerges. A general obsessed with refighting a past battle, a president terrified of political failure, and 6,000 men trapped in a kill box, their survival secondary to the game being played above their heads. This is the real story of Khe Sanh. By late 1967, the Vietnam War was going nowhere. Public support was in freefall. Americans were tired of a bloody, expensive conflict with no end in sight. President Lyndon B. Johnson and his top commander, General William Westmoreland, were desperate for a decisive victory that could change the narrative. Westmoreland's strategy was simple and brutal. Attrition. Kill the enemy faster than they can be replaced. It required huge battles and massive body counts. But there was a problem. The North Vietnamese didn't fight fair. They chose when and where to engage, then melted back into the jungle before American firepower could crush them. Westmoreland needed to force their hand. He needed a place where he could trap a massive enemy force and unleash the full might of American air power. He found it in a remote, fog-draped plateau in northwestern South Vietnam, just miles from the Laos border. Khe Sanh. Its strategic value was hotly debated, but for Westmoreland, it was perfect bait. Dig in here, dare the North Vietnamese to attack, and draw them into a fight they couldn't win. To understand Westmoreland's obsession, you need to know about the ghost haunting the Pentagon, Dien Bien Phu. In 1954, the French tried a similar gamble, fortifying a remote base to lure the Vietnamese into one final battle. It became a historic catastrophe. General Vo Nguyen Giap surrounded the French, dragged heavy artillery up the mountains, and pounded them into submission. The defeat ended French colonial rule in Indochina. Everyone in Washington remembered. LBJ was so consumed, he had a scale model of Khe Sanh built in the White House Situation Room. But where others saw a warning, Westmoreland saw opportunity. He was convinced he could pull off a reverse Dien Bien Phu. He gambled that Giap, the same general who defeated the French, couldn't resist repeating his greatest triumph. But this time would be different. This time, the surrounded army would be supplied by endless aircraft. This time, the hills would thunder not with enemy cannons, but with American B-52s. The plan was codenamed Operation Niagara, a waterfall of bombs on any enemy force that dared gather around the base. Khe Sanh wasn't just a fort. It was the anvil. American air power was the hammer. And the 6,000 Marines inside, they were the tethered goat, waiting for the tiger. Not everyone bought in. Senior Marine commanders hated the plan. The Marine Corps doctrine was about mobility, hunting the enemy, not sitting passively in fixed positions waiting to get hit. They saw Khe Sanh for what it was, a trap. Their concerns were practical. Monsoon weather could blanket the base in fog for days, grounding air support. If the single airstrip was destroyed, the garrison would be completely cut off. Being pinned down like this violated everything the Marines believed about how to fight. But Westmoreland wouldn't budge. He declared the defense of Khe Sanh absolutely essential. The base's importance was inflated to justify the enormous risk, presented as a critical anchor for the DMZ, a block against infiltration, a launch pad for future operations. Behind all the justifications, the core idea remained: lure the enemy into a meat grinder. The Marines' objections were overruled. An army general was dictating how they'd fight. The bait was set. January 21st, 1968. The North Vietnamese sprang the trap. The siege began with a fury of rockets, mortars, and artillery. For the 6,000 Marines at Khe Sanh, the world shrank to the space between sandbagged bunkers. The base absorbed hundreds of shells daily. On the worst day, over 1,300 rounds in just 8 hours. Survival meant mastering the Khe Sanh shuffle, a frantic zigzag sprint between cover, praying you wouldn't get caught in the open. Day 1. The main ammunition dump took a direct hit. More than 1,000 tons of ordnance detonated in a single catastrophic blast, blowing a hole in the base's defenses. The fight wasn't just impersonal artillery duels. On hills overlooking the base, like Hill 861, Marines fought off waves of infantry in brutal close-quarters combat. Young officers took command when their superiors fell. A defiant spirit took hold, captured in Major Matthew Caulfield's radio call. A Marine unit doesn't get overrun. It became a promise they made to themselves in the mud and chaos. But leaving the wire was suicide. On February 25th, a platoon, later known as the Ghost Patrol, walked into a perfectly laid ambush. They were nearly wiped out in minutes. Yet the base held. Above, Air Force, Army, and Navy pilots flew relentless missions, dropping nearly 100,000 tons of bombs in one of the most concentrated displays of air power in history. The Marines were the targets, but they were also the anchor for a colossal killing machine. After 77 brutal days, the siege broke. In early April, Operation Pegasus, a massive air and ground relief force, reopened the road to Khe Sanh. The North Vietnamese, devastated by relentless bombing, began pulling back. By every conventional measure, it was a major American victory. U.S. commanders claimed between 10,000 and 15,000 enemy killed, compared to a few hundred American dead. Though later analysis suggests actual losses were far lower, the narrative was set. Westmoreland's gamble had paid off. He'd lured the enemy in and annihilated them with air power. President Johnson awarded the 26th Marine Regiment a Presidential Unit Citation. Khe Sanh was celebrated as a heroic stand, Dien Bien Phu in reverse. But one question threatened to unravel everything. If this ground was so vital that hundreds had to die to hold it, why was it abandoned? July 5th, 1968. Just months after the victory, American forces quietly began dismantling Khe Sanh Combat Base. Bulldozers moved in, bunkers were destroyed, Marines withdrawn. The piece of ground that dominated headlines and haunted the White House was unceremoniously abandoned. The official reason? Tactics had changed. With more helicopters, mobile defense was supposedly more effective than fixed bases. But for the men who bled there, and the public who followed their fight, the explanation felt hollow. It exposed what many had suspected all along. Khe Sanh was never about the real estate. It was about politics and PR. A stage for Westmoreland's attrition strategy, a place to generate body counts to sell the war to a skeptical public. The 6,000 Marines weren't defending a strategic asset. They were the asset. They were bait, placed in extreme danger to draw the enemy into a televised slaughter. Once the North Vietnamese left and the political moment passed, the base and the reason for the sacrifice was simply discarded. The North Vietnamese army then took control of the region, extending their supply lines deeper south. The victory at Khe Sanh was hollow. It didn't change the war's course. Many historians now argue the massive focus on this remote base was a brilliant diversion, drawing U.S. attention and resources away from South Vietnam cities just as the real storm broke, the Tet Offensive. So was Khe Sanh a strategic masterstroke worth the cost, or a cynical betrayal of the men on the ground? Let us know what you think in the comments below.